Welcome to our weekly program, The Inside Story of Chabad in America through the Mindel Archives. 2 weeks ago, in our weekly program, I mentioned that since we are now in the month of Iyar, Iyar is abbreviation, Ani Hashem Refecha. It's a auspicious month for healing, for refuah. And I shared with you some answers from the Rebbe that people had problems, how to deal with anxiety. People had depression problems, and that made the problems in Shalom Bayis and other health issues. And the Rebbe answered each one what they need, and you can always click back and see, which I'm not going to repeat it now again. I also mentioned there that the Rebbe expresses himself in the English letters more clear than the Hebrew letters that the Igros Kodesh. And the reason, I think, is they're both from the Rebbe, the same thing. Whether the English letter and the Hebrew letter is the same thing. But because the Hebrew letters it's limited. A small percent of people can read it because not too many people know Hebrew. But English is probably 95% in the world, the entire world, the frum world, and people that are not frum yet, and even to Lahavdil Goyim, Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, they also read English. So the Rebbe expresses in English much more clear than the Hebrew. And the reason I'm saying that, I think, because when Rabbi Mindel in 1939, the Frierdiker Rebbe asked him to come with him to America, and he wanted that he should translate the Tanya in English. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said to him that the Tanya is a closed book, meaning that it's only in Hebrew. So how many people can speak Hebrew in the world? And the Rebbe he came to America, Yafutzu Ma'inisecho Chutza, spread out the Chassidus into the entire world with just the Hebrew, and you can't do that. You have to have English. So he asked Rabbi Mindel he should translate the Tanya in English, because that covers 95% of people in the world. So that's why I think that in English letters, the Rebbe expressed himself much more clear. Now, after that program, 2 weeks ago, I had many calls, many emails, and people that asked me for more letters about depression, about anxiety, about certain problems. And I saw from the emails that many people have sfeikos. They have doubts. And ein loch dova, ein loch simcha, ki hatoras hasfeikos. There is no greater joy than eliminating doubts. People have doubts and they have nowhere to turn. The only one they can turn is to the Rebbe. Answers what the Rebbe speaks to people. So I thought I would read today a letter from the Rebbe about another letter about depression. And by the way, I want to tell you, this book, The Letter and Spirit, this is the first volume, and we have, Baruch Hashem, five volumes. The 6th volume is going into print in a week, and we're also almost finished the 7th volume. This is about health, answers about health, about the Holy Land, about science, about how to deal with family, and this is amazing. These are all English letters. So I'm going to share with you a letter about somebody asked about depression. But before that, I want to mention something. Since we are now in the month of Iyar, Iyar is Ani Hashem Refecho, meaning that Iyar is Mesugal, is an auspicious month for refuah, for healing, for cure. So the Rebbe asked a question, why Iyar? I mean, the Eibishter, God cures every minute got yours every month. What does it mean that B'dafka in Iyar is an auspicious month? I mean, it is an abbreviation, Iyar, Ani Hashem Refecha, but there is probably a more deeper meaning why Iyar B'dafka is an auspicious month. So he answers like this. Everything in the world, everything is B'hashgacha Protius, by divine providence. Since Iyar comes after the month of Nisan, B'hashgacha Protius, and the name is Iyar. Sivan comes after the month of Iyar. Tammuz comes after the month of Sivan, and so on. So Nisan, and Iyar is after Nisan. Nisan is a month, we all know, a month of Nisim, miracles, 2 nuns. This is the time where the Eibishter took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, the biggest miracle. And the miracle of Nisan is, as it says, Ani v'loi malach. God Himself did the miracle. Ani v'loi sarov. Ani v'loi sholiach. Ani hu v'loi acher. HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoidoi ve'atzmai. The Eibishter Himself took the Yidden. That's the biggest miracle of Nisan, that the Eibishter Himself did it. Iyar is a continuation of that, of Nisan. As it says, Kol ha'machalo asher samti b'Mitzrayim loy osim alecho ki ani Hashem refecha. All the sicknesses that I did in Mitzrayim, I would not do. But why? Because the Eibishter Himself is the healer. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu yitin l'shus l'reifah l'rapis, the Eibishter gave permission for a doctor. If a doctor cures, it's not the doctor, it's God. The doctor is only a shliach of God. So what's the difference between when God does it Himself, ani v'lo yashaliach, or a doctor? The difference is when a doctor cures, there is a sickness, and the doctor cures. But for example, God forbid somebody had a heart attack. So the doctor cures, Baruch Hashem, through the Eibishter, the doctor is the shliach, but they still left there, you can still see that the person was sick. You could still tell. But when Ani Hashem Refecha, when the Eibishter Himself does it, first of all, the Eibishter will make that when the Eibishter does it, He does it in the first place, he doesn't get sick. And even if the person does get sick, after the sickness, you can't even tell that the person was sick. That is the difference between the Eibishter. So the Eibishter does, or through a doctor. So Iyar is a continuation of Nisan, of the Nisim. So the Nisim, that the way was Nisan, so now it's Iyar, it goes into Iyar that Ani, and Iyar is Arosh Tevis, Ani Hashem Refecho. So Iyar is an auspicious time for Refuah Shleima. I saw in a sefer somewhere, I don't know where, that in Iyar, rain, in month of Iyar helps, is a healer. There's some people, when it rains, they open the mouth and they try to have the rain in the mouth. Anyways, so since that's a special time for healing, so I would like to mention, a few people mentioned to me, since many people listen to this program, so a few people mentioned to me, if I can mention for a full shleimo, Chaya Miriam Penina Basbati Bela, Eliyahu ben Zisel Dvaira, Michael Akiva Gershon ben Rochel Basha, Risha Esther Chai Bas Chava Shoshana, Aaron ben Chana, Chaim David ben Doberezel, Reuven Lei ben Shendel, Tzivia Yechevet, Chana Bas Ete, Chaim Menachem Mendel, Aryeh ben Rive Rochel, Zevicheske ben Mindel, and Shibi Besoich, Chayla Yisrael, that they should have a refuah shleima mamish bekoriv mamish. Now I want to read to you the English letter. It's a fundamental, a basic letter, clear, and we don't have to analyze anything. I want to read to you that this is an answer to somebody that wrote about depression. A blessing and greeting. This is to a woman, because the Rebbe usually writes to a man greeting and blessing, but to women he writes blessing and greeting. I am in receipt of your letter, in which you write about your thoughts and feelings as you look around and see what is happening in the world. As requested, I will remember you in prayer for the fulfillment of your heart's desire for good. With regard to some of the thoughts expressed in your letter, especially the depression which you feel, induced by the negative aspects so common in life. And then the Rebbe writes him, this is something private which I'm not going to read, but I'm going to skip 2 paragraphs when the Rebbe gets to the answer of depression. As for the actual cause of the depression about which you write, namely the suffering and pain that you see around you, raising the question why God does all this. And many people have this question, why does God do it? Surely you know that this question was already asked by many a great believer, even Moshe Rabbeinu. Nevertheless, the inability of the human mind to grasp God's ways does not in any way distract the believer from his devotion and service to God with joy and gladness of heart. And certainly does not, and the Rebbe wrote here himself, should not, he erased does not, he wrote should not, affect the effort and activities to spread Yiddishkeit. And while no one can compare to such a spiritual giant as Moshe Rabbeinu, in whose case it is small wonder that he was not affected by such distraction thoughts, yet the fact that the Torah tells us about it, and the Torah is not just a book of stories, but as the word Torah implies instruction, it is clear that it teaches us that not only are such questions and doubts quite natural, but that after Moshe Rabbeinu had trodden this path, he has made it easier for every Jew to follow in his footsteps and remain steadfast in absolute faith and trust in God. On the other hand, it is not true to say that a Jew must never ask such questions. On the contrary, God desires the Jew to serve him not only on the basis of pure faith, but also with his intellect. And it is for this reason that God has endowed a human being with an intellect to be able to understand, at least to some extent, God's ways. One must only remember that words of the prophet, God's thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways, and we cannot therefore draw inferences and conclusions on the basis of our thoughts and ways. But within our intellectual and mental limitation, God indeed desires us to inquire and probe and acquire such knowledge of God as possible. One point that may be helpful to counteract the kind of depression you speak of is to remember that a human being, the Rebbe says, even if he lives to 120 years, has a limited existence on this earth, while the soul, which is the real essence of a person, is eternal and exists before and after it inhabited the physical body. Obviously, when the time comes for the soul to leave the physical body, by reason of the latter old age or disease, the soul is not in the slightest affected by the physical cause of death and continue its eternal existence. Consequently, can a human being logically ask what justification there is for any particular case of suffering, being entirely oblivious of what had happened in the course of hundreds or thousands of years of the soul's life before and after it sojourns in this physical world? At the same time, we have the fullest assurance that God is just and equitable, and therefore it is certain that no evil comes from Him. On the contrary, where there is a good reason behind every suffering, which is a blessing in disguise, and which will eventually become evident and appreciated. And this is also the meaning of the verse in the Haftarah read the last day of Pesach. Ve'omarto bayoyim hahu oitcho Hashem ki onafta bi yoshuv apcho v'nachameni. And you will say on that day, I will thank you, O God, for having been angry with me when your anger turns away and you comfort me. By way of example, on the happy occasion when parents lead their child to the chuppah and you remind the mother about the birth pains she had suffered when giving birth to the child, she will say, thank God for those pains. It is surely necessary to further elaborate to you on the above, especially as you could also discuss this with friends. I take this opportunity to express my confident hope that you and your husband are continuing to do the good work to spread Yiddishkeit, and especially Taras HaMishpacha in particular, and this will help everything, and this will help Shalom Bayis, and this will help a lot of things. So we see from here, this is, I think, a very important letter for people that have doubts. Now, there's another letter attached to this. As somebody asked, I don't know why it's attached to this, about also depression. The Rebbe was so much, and the Rebbe bought the Tanya, that, they say about mikveh is not a mitzvah, and atzvus, depression, is not a sin. But what mikveh can bring, no other thing can bring. A person becomes clean, becomes tahor. And what depression can bring, no other avera can bring. What depression can bring for the worst things. So Bechal, the Rabbi speaks over here. This is a letter that probably is going to be in the letter in the spirit, that somebody asked the Rebbe about, he didn't have success in yeshiva, and he feels bad, he becomes depressed. So the Rebbe, I don't want to go into it because we have no time. So as I mentioned before, that we hope that since this is the month of Iyar, and there's many answers for the Rebbe in depression, and about other inyonim of health. So Yimitz Hashem, we hope to print all the English letters, and Yimitz Hashem next week will continue more about that. Thank you very much.